Type 3 medium tank Chi-Nu was a medium tank of the Imperial Japanese Army in World War II. The tank was an improved version of the Type 1 medium tank Chi-He, which itself was an improved version of the Type 97 Chi-Ha. The Chi-Nu was the last tank that was deployed in the Japanese tank forces during World War II. It was designed in 1943 when it became apparent that even the high-velocity 47mm gun on the Type 97 Chi-Ha Kai would not be enough against the American-made M4 Sherman, which completely outperformed the smaller and weaker Chi-Ha, until the bigger and better Type 4 Chi-To could be produced in sufficient numbers. This never happened, since the Empire of Japan had massive logistical problems, with a lot of precious steel being prioritized for the Imperial Navy instead of the tank forces. Still, the Chi-Nu was slowly produced until the end of the war. Welcome to another Tank Encyclopedia voiced article. I'm your host, Wood, and today I'll be covering the Type 3 Chi-Nu. If you like what we do, remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single video. If you want to contribute more directly, consider donating on Patreon or PayPal. It helps us keep the lights on. Since the production of the Type 3 Chi-Nu did not commence until the end of 1944, the Japanese Imperial Army had gathered enough experience from past and more recent campaigns. The backbone of the Imperial Army consisted of lighter and lightly armed tanks and tankettes. Soon enough, it became apparent that these models, which were designed for mainly countering infantry, were insufficient when it came to tank combat because of their weak armor and weak cannons. One example of this poor showing of Japanese tanks in tank versus tank combat was with the Red Army in 1939 at the Battle of Khalkhin Gol. This resulted in the decision to upgrade the Type 97 Chi-Ha. Another example is that of the Burma campaign in 1942, where the British were still using the somewhat obsolete M3 Stuarts of the 7th Hussars and 2nd Royal Tank Regiments. When the Japanese 1st Tank Regiment arrived in Burma, they conducted some test firing against an M3 Stuart. They discovered that the armor-piercing round of the Type 97's low-velocity 57mm couldn't penetrate the M3 from any angle at any range. This made them worry about how they could continue any future assaults, since they did not possess the means to easily dispatch enemy armor. This experience made the Japanese realize that their tanks were no longer facing just infantry, and they needed to be able to attack heavily armored targets as well. Thus, when the need for a new tank arose, a lot of past design mistakes were addressed and fixed. In order to understand the design philosophy behind the Japanese tanks, the tactics that were also used with these vehicles must also be understood. For the Japanese Army, speed and agility were of high importance, since tanks were used for a variety of roles, from scouting to infantry support. This meant that the tanks had to be able to fire quickly and relocate to a new objective as fast as possible. Japanese tankers would continue to advance even if they outran their accompanying infantry, or if the infantry halted or fell behind under enemy fire. In case a tank advanced way too far ahead of the rest of the formation, it would normally return to them, but Japanese tankers were generally quite aggressive. If infantry was not available, the tankers would dismount to clear obstacles themselves and even attack the Allied troops covering them. When attacking a strong anti-tank defense, wave tactics were used. If the defenses were light, they would be massed forward. The infantry would follow closely behind the tanks with artillery neutralizing defenses with high explosive and smoke. In some instances, infantrymen rode on the back of tanks. Japanese tanks were used in both standalone operations, most of which were reconnaissance, and combined arms fights. The Type 3 Chi-Nu medium was a further development of the Type 1 Chi-He, which was a further development of the Type 97 Chi-Ha. In 1943, the IJA got information about new Allied tanks, like the Sherman, from their military attaché in Berlin. Thus, it was decided that a new and better tank would be needed to face this threat. The IJA learned of advances in tank technology through samples of the Panzer III, Panzer IV, Panther, and Tiger tanks that were ordered, and by examining captured examples of the Soviet T-34s and M4 Shermans in Germany. Designing an entirely new tank required too much time, and the Japanese were in need of a better medium tank now. So the Type 3 Chi-Nu was developed as a stopgap. Its predecessor, the Type 1 Chi-He, was an improved version of the Type 97 Chi-Ha, created by using the Type 1 47mm cannon, along with some other changes, like simplifying the front glacis plate using a flat plate. Also, a more extensive use of welding was introduced to reduce the risk of rivets being shattered inward if hit in combat. Although the new design of the Type 3 Chi-Nu was accepted for service in 1943, production of the Type 1 Chi-He continued at Mitsubishi until November 1943. The development of the Chi-Nu started in May 1943 and was completed in October of that year, which was considered incredibly fast for that time. However, Type 3 Chi-Nu production did not begin until September 1944. Mitsubishi was chosen for production, delivering 55 vehicles in 1944 and 89 to 111 more until the last days of the war. These low numbers were due to shortages of steel, since priority was given to the Navy. The initial Army Technical Bureau program, which would lead to the Type 4 Chi-To, was not ready on schedule, accumulating problems and production delays. The Army decided to produce the Type 3 based on the Type 1. This is basically a beefed-up Chi-Ha, slightly longer and wider with thicker side armor and a 50mm strong frontal glacis plate. The hull was simplistic and easy to produce. It consisted of a slightly angled lower front plate and angled upper mid plate, which led to the horizontal front. The fighting compartment, alongside the ammunition storage, was located at the center of the vehicle, with the turret ring on top that was increased in diameter to 170 centimeters. The tank was supported by 6 road wheels on each side. The front and rear road wheels were independently sprung, while the center wheels sprung in pairs by coil springs. The turret was manned by 3 crew members, and featured a main gun as well as more ammunition storage. The turret was a brand new hexagonal design made of welded plates. There was a commander cupola similar to that of the Type 1 and Type 97, equipped with a rotatable ring arm mounting a regular Type 97 machine gun for anti-aircraft close defense. The cupola on the turret was on the right-hand side and was given several bulletproof glass episcopes for observation. Both sides of the turret had observation hatches and also featured pistol ports. Another large hatch was put at the turret's back for ammunition purposes. It came with a Type 3 code radio, which could send and receive code and voice signals. The large antennas of the vehicle were located at the rear, at the left and right edges of the engine block, giving the vehicle an effective range of 15 kilometers for voice communication or 50 kilometers for telegraphic. The Chi-Nu ended up weighing about 19 metric tons. The main armament of the Type 3 Chi-Nu was a makeshift weapon derived from the Type 90 artillery gun, which was basically a French Snider 75mm gun from World War I. It was adopted as the Type 90, and due to the short life of its barrel, was modified to have a lower muzzle velocity. In 1943, the Japanese Army decided to modify the cannon so it could be used by tanks, and changed its designation to the Type 3 75 anti-tank cannon Models 1 and 2, with the Type 3 Chi-Nu being given the Model 2. Both weapons were modified by giving them modern aiming devices, which had not been present on the original Type 90 cannon. Japan adopted the gun when it realized that the model Type 90 anti-tank artillery could actually penetrate the M4 Sherman's armor at a distance of 500 meters. However, it was highly advisable to attack the rear or side in order to minimize ricochets. The gun had a weight of 1,000 kilograms, with the standard Type 1 armor-piercing projectile weighing around 6 or 7. The muzzle velocity was 668 meters per second, and the Type 1 was capable of penetrating 84 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor at a distance of 500 yards. The testing results of the Type 1 APHE shell were mediocre and did not meet the requirements of the cannon. In order to improve this, the Army developed a tungsten chromium steel anti-tank shell known as the Type 1 APHE Toko-Ko. The shell had an improved muzzle velocity of 683 meters per second, and was capable of penetrating 100 millimeters of rolled homogeneous at 500 yards and 85 millimeters at 1,000 yards. These shells held around 10 grams of explosive each. Explosives were heavily prioritized for Japanese tank cannon shells in order to cause as much post-penetration damage as possible. Due to the problems with the distribution of rare metals, a set of armor-piercing shells contained 0.5 to 0.75% of carbon, unlike American anti-tank shells that were using high carbon steel and 1% chromium, 0.2% molybdenum, and other small amounts of nickel. The gun elevation was -10 all the way up to 25 degrees. It used a hydropneumatic recoil system and was loaded manually through a horizontal sliding block breech. The armor was exactly the same as that of the Type 1 Chi-He since they had the same chassis. Even though this was an upgrade from the 97 Chi-Ha, it was still not enough to protect the crew or components from the more powerful Sherman or T-34s. The Type 3 Chi-Nu did not see any combat since it was kept in reserve for the protection of the Japanese homeland for the upcoming Allied invasion, if that ever came. The tanks would have been used for massive counterattacks as a shock force to dislodge the Allied forces from their positions. A significant force was in Fukuoka on Kyushu and served with the 4th Tank Division. Some of them were even kept at the Imperial Palace with the Emperor's Imperial Guard until the dissolution of the Empire. At least some of the vehicles received a 3-tone camouflage. One of these tanks was brought to the US after the war, and another was displayed at Tokyo Ordnance Depot and Akabane. This was returned to the Defense Agency after the US military withdrew. It is currently stored as a reference weapon at the Ground Self-Defense Force Weapons School in Tsuchiura, Ibaraki Prefecture. Even though the Type 3 Chi-Nu was the only Japanese mass-produced tank that could stand off against a Sherman, it still lacked in the armor sector, since it was only designed to serve as a stopgap. The combination of the industrial manufacturing capacity being given to the naval forces, as well as the lack of raw materials, ended up making the Type 3 a very valuable asset that could not be spared for naval assaults or other offenses in the Pacific. Thus, it was kept on the home island for defenses only. This concludes our look at the Chi-Nu. If you like what we do and want to see more, remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on a single video. If you want to contribute more directly, consider donating on Patreon or PayPal. It helps us keep the lights on and allow us to improve the quality of our videos. Until next time, keep us in your sights.